Good morning, students. This is Sampat Bhadu, Assistant Professor of English, Government College, Sri Dungargarh, Bikaner. Today we are going to take up the next poem entitled Spring and Fall, composed by G.M. Hopkins. Spring and Fall. Let's discuss about the poem. Spring and Fall to a Young Child is a short lyric. It is addressed to a young girl, Margaret. It was written at a time when Hopkins was feeling most depressed by overwork and by what he regarded as the squalor of his life. Hopkins was at that time living in Liverpool, which he thought to be, of all places, and most useless, a most unhappy and miserable spot. In a letter to Bridges, he spoke of the poem as a little piece composed since I began this letter, not founded on any real incident. I am not well satisfied with It is a sad little poem on the subject of human mortality. Margaret weeps at the falling of leaves in autumn. Later, the girl will realize that she is in reality mourning her own mortality, of which the falling of leaves is a symbol. The poem seems to certify Macbeth's cry. My way of life is fallen into the sword, the yellow leaf. According to the title, the poem is addressed to a young child, but the movement is not only towards her mourning for herself, but also towards Hopkins mourning for himself. He represents the fall or autumn, while she represents the spring, and the contrast of young age and the old age, innocence and experience, is at the basis of the poem. The poem has a special grace in its use of octosyllabi couplets that is seldom achieved in this verse form in English. Actually, the poem is addressed to a young child named Margaret. Margaret is an imaginary child. The idea conveyed through the poem are not Hopkins' own ideas, they are the ideas of the imaginary child, Margaret. She feels unhappy on the falling of the leaves in a forest. The poet asks the young child, Margaret, if she is unhappy at the sight of the falling leaves. The poet tells Margaret that leaves are just like men and women. He tells her that she need not feel sorry because she is yet fresh and young. When men grow older, they see such sights very often, and so such sights do not affect them at all. They do not utter even a single sigh, even if they see large woods falling down leaf by leaf and lying into the dust. It is because people are habituated to such sights. Leaves, like the things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for. Can you? The poet says this explanation will, however, not prevent the child Margaret from feeling sorry over the shedding of the leaves in the forest. The poet says that the child's heart weeps not because of the falling of the leaves in a single forest as such, but because she knows that the cause of sorrow everywhere is the same. As the heart grows older, by and by, nor spare a sigh, though world of manward leave me lie, and yet you will weep and know why. It is very strange that although this fact about decay and death is no secret, yet nobody has so far expressed it. The source of all grief and sorrow is the fact of mortality for both man and nature. Everything decays and dies in the end. Man is mortal. Man was born to die in the end. Margaret grieves not so much because she sees the decay and death of the forest, but because she knows that she herself is subject to death. In the falling leaves, she sees the vision of her own decay and death. The poet says to her, "It is Margaret, you mourn for Margaret is grieving for the death of Margaret, for that individuality and distinctness which is symbolized by the figure and name of Margaret." Let's take up the text. Margaret, are you grieving over golden grove unliving? Leaves, like the things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for, can you? Ah, as the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder, by and by, nor spare a sigh, though worlds of vanward leave may lie. These lines are from the poem Spring and Fall by Hopkins. In this poem, a child named Margaret feels sorrowful on seeing the death and decay of leaves in the forest. It is her first confrontation with this phenomenon in nature. So she is sad and sorrowful. The poet says that man who daily sees such death and decay everywhere, do not feel sorrowful over this sight. The young girl feels unhappy on the falling of leaves in the forest. The poet asks her if the sight of the fall of leaves has made her sad and sorrowful. He tells her that the leaves are just like men in this world. He tells her that such fall and decay is a common sight in the world. It is so in the case of men and women. She is sad because she has encountered death and decay in the world for the first time. She is young and fresh. Men who have seen such sights many times are not at all affected by it. They grow cold to such sights of death and decay. Even the death of large forests will not move them. They have grown so much used to it. When we analyze the poem, line by line, we find that the poem is an expression of grief on human mortality. The first two lines of the poem contain a question, showing the poet's wonder that the child can be sad about a wood's loss of leaves. In the next two lines, the question is extended to suggest that the girl, though innocent, is yet capable of caring for things pertaining not only to nature but to man. The four lines that follow balance the first four and express the idea that as the girl grows older, her capacity to feel for natural things will diminish, will reduce, and she will not then sigh at such sights. The poets putting together the words van and wood in line 8 to make a pale autumnal equivalent of golden grove of line 2, and making leaf meal on analogy with piecemeal intensifies the impression of the great change that comes about between spring and autumn. That is the symbol of fall. Golden grove, vanwood, leaf meal, all these words are the coinage of the poet. Coinage means they are coined or created by the poet himself. Next stanza. And yet you will weep and know why. Now no matter, child, the name, sorrow's springs are the same, nor mouth had, no nor mind expressed. What heart heard of, ghost gazed. It is the blight man was born for. It is Margaret you mourn for. These are the concluding lines of the poem Spring and Fall, written by J.M. Hopkins. The poet says that the young child Margaret is full of sorrow on seeing the death and decay of leaves. But such a sight does not make older men sorrowful, because they see this everywhere, anytime. They have grown so used to it that they are not at all affected by such type of sights. The girl Margaret too will not weep over this, she will, however, yet be sad. Line number 9 marks the turning point in the poem. It reads, "And yet you will weep, and know why." In terms of rhyme, it seems to belong with the couplet before, "Why?" rhyming with sigh and lie. But in its weeping, it belongs to the second form. In its weeping, line number 9 relates in the spring. But the cause of weeping resides in the knowledge that comes with age. He then explains, being one who knows why he weeps. In these lines, the poet says that the cause of all sorrow and sadness is the same, whether in the world of nature or man. Everyone knows this. None, however, gives expression to this effect, to this fact. The poet says that it is very strange that although the fact about death and decay is no secret, yet none has so far expressed this. The sorrow of all grief and sorrow, the source of all grief and sorrow, is the fact of mortality for man and as well as nature. Man is mortal, he takes birth and dies. This process goes on forever. The poet therefore concludes that the child Margaret weeps not so much over the fall of leaves as over the fact of her own death and decay. Margaret weeps for Margaret herself. She grieves for the death of that individuality and distinctness which is symbolized by the figure and name of Margaret. The falling here, the falling of the leaves is a significant factor, not only in itself but for what it symbolizes. What the girl is really grieving for is the fact of death and decay, to which she too, like all nature, as well as all mankind, is finally doomed. The poem ends with the philosophical thought that it is the blight man was born for, and that Margaret is in fact mourning for herself or over her mortality. The series of balances and comparisons in this poem give it a calm but persuasive articulation, and the consciousness of all that is involved in knowledge and fall gives this apparently slight poem a great deal of weight. Dear students, it's a wonderful philosophical poem by G.M. Hopkins. You know, G.M. Hopkins was a profound, a philosophical, and a religious poet. G.M. Hopkins was a thoughtful poet. And you know that here the child is inexperienced, the child is innocent, the child sees the falling of the leaves for the first time and it cries. You know very well that child is very much moved by the falling of the leaves. Here the poet compares beautifully the falling of the leaves with the falling of the men. Means the falling of the leaves is compared with the human death. We human beings also, we take birth, grow, and then die. Likewise, similarly, the leaves grow on the trees, they grow full-fledged, and they become pale, and eventually they fall. So this journey of man and the cause of of these leaves has been beautifully compared by the poet. Here, Margaret, while she is a child, she cries for the falling of leaves. But with the passage of time, she grows and she becomes knowledgeable. She gains experience of life, and she confronts with the multiple sorrows, and she comes to know that yes, this is the human being's life that is destined to end, that is doomed to end one day. We can't escape, we can't be immortal. Human being is mortal. And we have to die. Everybody has to die. One who was born is subject to death. Nobody is immortal. So, at the end of the poet becomes philosophical, and through this experience of the child, the poet expresses his own philosophy that we human beings, the child mourns for herself, for her own figure, for her own individuality, for her own physique, and she mourns for it simply because she knows that one day she has to die, and her regret, her imagination, her mourning is symbolical of the death of entire humanity, means all human beings are subject to death. That's all for today. Have a nice day. Thank you.